Welcome. Today is the second day of Av, the 6th of August. We're up to the third reading of Parshat Devarim, the first in the book of Deuteronomy. And in this reading, Moses recounts the events surrounding the spies that were sent to tour the land of Israel, the land of Canaan, and to report back. And this is especially pertinent to our time period because the 9th of Av, which is next week, which will be on Wednesday next week, the 9th day of the month of Av, is the fast day that commemorates the destruction of the first and second temples in Jerusalem. But long before that, the 9th of Av was the night on which the spies returned from their tour of the land of Canaan and brought back their really atrocious report, which caused the people to lose faith in being able to enter the land and conquering it. And so that night they sat and they wept, and if we remember from not too long ago, it was about 6 weeks ago when we read the Parshat Shalach, then Rashi said that God said, "You wept with no reason, and I will ensure that you have a reason to weep on this night." And since that was the 9th day, it was the eve of the 9th of Av, about 800 years later, when the first temple was destroyed, this became the national day of mourning for the Jewish people. And as the sages say, if the nations of the world would understand, would acknowledge how important the temple was for the well-being and the peace of the world, they too would join us in mourning. In any case, there's a very interesting thing that Moses adds here that we didn't see the first time in Parshat Shlach when the whole episode happened. And in Deuteronomy 1:27, we read the following: "You slandered in your tents and said, 'Out of God's hatred of us, He took us out of Egypt to deliver us into the hands of the Amorites to exterminate us.'" In Hebrew, it actually sounds even more powerful. "V'teragnu ba'aleichem v'tomru b'sinat Hashem otanu." Out of God's hatred of us, He took us out of Egypt. Now this is amazing. How could it be that after all the compassion, all the loving kindness that God had shown the Israelites, taking them out of Egypt, out of the bondage that they had no way of escaping from, and guiding them through the desert, through the wilderness for a year and a half. At that point it was about a year and a half. Providing for them, fighting their war against them, against the Egyptians at the Red Sea, drowning the Egyptians, bringing down the manna, bringing the quail, ensuring, giving them forgiveness after the golden calf. And you see that step after step, even Rashi here in one of the verses says, "I carried you like a man carries his child on his shoulders," ensuring that you wouldn't be hurt by anything. And then they come and they say, "Out of God's hatred for us, He took us out of Egypt." What is that? Rashi, the classic commentary from the Middle Ages, he writes on these words, "out of God's hatred for us," he writes, "and yet He loved you, but you hated Him." And what is this like? It's like people say that a person sees the behavior of another person as reflecting his own. This is called projection. And it is one of many defense mechanisms that we find in psychology. Defense mechanisms are not new. We've known about them for time immemorial because every single human being has defense mechanisms. Defense mechanisms are used to protect the ego, to protect us from uncomfortable truths that we can't handle. So for instance, projection is when I can't handle the fact that I incredulously, illegitimately, uncalled for, act towards somebody in a certain way, feel towards someone rather in a certain way, without any reason. And I can't handle this feeling, knowing that I'm wrong about it. So what I do is I project my emotions on the person that I feel them towards. In this case, the emotions are not being projected on another person. They're actually being projected on God. So really the truth is, as Rashi says here, they're projecting their hatred of God. Now one might wonder, why would someone hate God? Well, a lot of people in the world hate God. And they're very uncomfortable about it, because deep down inside we know that this world is not a trap. We're not being set up. There's a lot of things that we do wrong. And the purpose of the world is to grow. The purpose of the world, as we spoke about a few weeks ago, maybe about a week ago actually, is to learn that we need to feel love for things, to open us to love, to caring. To love, because love is first of all an emotion that is a product of my ability to confess to myself, to admit to myself that I'm not perfect, that I have needs, that I'm not whole yet. And so I love different things. I love food, I love air, I love sunlight, I love the day, I love my family, I love my people, I love the Torah. All these things are things that I need in order to thrive. And I can't produce them myself. I have a need for others, I have a need for other things. Life was meant to grow, and yet we stump our growth many times. And to get over that, God sometimes sends us difficulties, true difficulties. In this case, the people were meant to grow in the sense of understanding that it's time to get off of your father's shoulders. It's time to start being independent. It's time to go conquer the land with God's help, but it's going to demand things from you. It's going to demand that you won't have all the time in the world to learn. You won't have all the time in the world to be spiritual. You're going to have to find spirituality in more mundane and coarse things, but the spirituality is there to be found if you really want to find it. You're going to need all of this. And yet they weren't ready for that change. So their response was, we can't handle this. But when you can't handle something, and that inability to carry the load is an emotion of probably frustration with yourself, which is the same thing as feeling that God is frustrated with you. So you project that outwards, and you say, it's not really that I'm frustrated with you, God. It's not really that I can't live up to your standards. It's not really that I hate what you stand for, my growth, my ability to become more than what I am right now, my ability to fulfill myself. That's what you, God, stand for, but I hate that. I don't want to go there. So my response is projection. It's not I that hate that. It's you that hate me. And that is the classic defense mechanism that almost every single one of us exercises from time to time. To be a true defense mechanism, it has to be unconscious to us. We can't know that we're actually doing it. And it was unconscious to them. They didn't realize that that's what they were doing. They didn't realize that it was they who hated the destiny that they needed to pursue. and that destiny was what God stood for at that moment. They didn't realize that. So what they did was they projected. And by projecting the same feeling on God, saying, well, it's my destiny that hates me, it's God that hates me, the ego frees itself of the feelings of being wrong, being unjust, being incorrect, and being morally at a disadvantage. And so really it's him who hates me. This is at the core of why the temple was destroyed. Because the temple is a place to meet God. But what the Israelites kept doing in the first temple, and what we continue to do, because the sages tell us that every generation that doesn't rebuild the temple, it's as if the temple was destroyed in their generation. We continue to project our ill feelings on God. And this is something that requires a much wider therapy, which is human-wide. It goes towards all of us. First and foremost, the Jewish people, that we need to come to peace with our relationship with God. And the first thing that needs to be removed is exactly this feeling of projecting onto God those negative feelings that we have for Him. I once had a talk with a friend of mine who's a very deep psychologist, very God-fearing man, and he told me, whenever somebody comes to me and says, I don't have any problems with my father, in fact, my father, he's not an issue, so I know the problem is with his father, because we project out these feelings. We can't handle them. We can't handle the fact that we dislike the people who have done so much for us, because we dislike them for our own reasons, not really because they've done anything to us, and then we project it onto them. So if somebody says to me, I don't have any problem with God, I don't have any issues with God, because for me God is a non-starter, I don't have a relationship even. So that means that that's exactly where the problem is, because what the person is saying basically is that they feel that a relationship is impossible. And it's true, when you project onto the other side those negative feelings that you have for them, then it seems to you that there can't be a relationship. And it seems to you that you're in the right, they're in the wrong, and there's no way to really reconcile. But that is the first thing that we need to learn as a people, as humankind, as human beings in this world, to understand that so much of what we feel God is hurting us with is actually a projection from our own feelings onto Him. Apart from that, there are many defense mechanisms found in our psychology. The two other most important ones are denial and repression. We don't have time to get into them now. I invite you to sign up for my Patreon, where there is a 13-part course on defense mechanisms and their root in the Bible, their root in the sayings of the sages, and what they represent really, what kind of spiritual work we need to do to get rid of denial, to get rid of projection, to get rid of repression, and to be able to free ourselves to build relationships that actually work. Thanks very much for joining. Hope to see you tomorrow.